699 days. That is the time difference between when Gran Turismo Sport's servers are going to be shut down on January 31st, 2024, which of course is not that far away now, compared to the release date of Gran Turismo 7 on March 4th, 2022. 699 days. Why does GT Sport shutting down, or rather its servers, bother me at all? I am vocal about having never liked the game, and I said as much while I was still making content for it, so why do I care that the servers are being shut down? Well, actually, it doesn't bother me at all that the servers are being shut down. Quite on the contrary, what bothers me is that they were still up in the first place. And the reason why it bothers me is this. October 17th, 2017, GT Sport was released. On March 28th of 2018, barely 5 months later, 163 days later to be exact, the GT6 servers were shut down. 163 days compared to 699. Any conjecture that there was back then about that being a monetary decision has surely been destroyed, because this proves that. GT6 was a wholly, entirely different game to what GT Sport was. In comparison, GT7 has much more in common with GT Sport for most of us, the vast majority in fact, making sport completely redundant. There is, in fact, not a single thing I can think of in GT Sport which GT7 can't do, if not do better. So why then, 700 days later, is the server still being kept on life support for a game that many of us have not touched in close to 2 years, compared to GT6, which we were still enjoying at the time? And just to drive this point home, I put out a poll to ask people if you could choose to have the sports servers or the 6 servers up, which would you choose? It will surprise no one that in an overwhelming majority of 80%, it was GT6. And with that honest answer of 4-1 in favour of Gran Turismo 6's servers, that goes to show literally a decade after the release of Gran Turismo 6, which came out in late 2013, there is still more support, more fandom and more fervour for that game 2 consoles ago than there is for GT Sport, which is barely a few years old on 1 generation of console back, which many players could easily still fire up and play if they wanted to. Why does all of this bother me? It bothers me for the obvious reason. If it's not monetary, why was it shut down? Why was it shut down barely 5 months after the release of Sport? Why, in comparison, has GT Sports server lasted 1 year and barely under 11 months in comparison before being shut down? Because GT Sport and GT7 both represent the current sphere of Kaz's interests. Except that brings us to a problem. And the problem is, who are these choices being made for? Is it for the community? Is it for the bottom line? Or is it for Kaz? Because those really are the 3 fundamental choices. You have the community, which would make sense given that we literally made you what you are. You have the bottom line, which also makes sense, except the funny thing about the bottom line is it often tends to align with what the community wants a lot of the time. Because if you keep people happy, you make more money. Thirdly, though, we have Kaz, the man with the vision. Easy to praise, easy to criticise, as anyone who's done anything great always is, and I will continue to both critique and compliment him, much like I do the series that he made, which I and many of us love so much. Why then do I have a problem with this? Because this whole saga of Gran Turismo started with Kaz. In fact, from what I've heard, and I could be wrong because I don't actually know a citation for this, but I seem to recall reading that Kaz's original idea, his original intent for Gran Turismo 1, even though they didn't know that was what it would be at the time, was actually going to be a far less forgiving game. A game which the average kid would have no idea how to approach, with very unforgiving tuning and a total focus on professional people, knowing already what they're doing with cars, how to get the best out of them, how to drive them, etc. Ironically, actual real driving simulator, contrary to what the franchise has been ever since, which is much more accessible. That's fine. Except even from day one, that proves that CAS had to be brought into check. Because sure, that works for a personal project, but if you're actually trying to make money and be successful, you need a few more people to be able to get into it. And that's what gave us the Gran Turismo that we know and love. A great idea, but polished by the masses, making it something that the hardcores can enjoy, but that the average Joe can also enjoy, which doubles your audience, if not more, and makes the game a lasting legend, which is exactly what many of us feel about Gran Turismo, whether we grew up with it, or whether we came to it later on, and for some even with the two most recent games being that entry point for them. Where the problem comes into play is right around that time of Gran Turismo Sport, because this is the biggest left swerve that we had in the Gran Turismo series. Far more of a swerve than something like a prologue or a concept, way more of a swerve than the PSP game ever was, and ironically, even more of a radical left turn than Tourist Trophy, because Tourist Trophy was a great idea. It didn't replace anything, it was an alternative, and I've said that many times about Sport. It wasn't an alternative. So to say, well, just don't play it then, well, literally what were our choices? GT6's servers were gone, so we couldn't enjoy that with friends, and Sport was the only other option, unless you want to play Forza. And believe me, as someone who creates content for both series, there are plenty of people who would at best roll their eyes at the thought of even playing Forza. Although I'm sure many of those people are looking a lot more favourably on Forza now than they ever thought they would be. So with that in mind, bringing us up to the time of today, who are these choices actually being made for? Because I see a lot of the same flawed logic in comments, and doubtless there'll be some of this logic in this comment section as well. And if not here, on various other places, I'm sure you can think of a few. People who don't tend to like anyone that thinks differently to the general consensus. So let's talk some hard facts. I've spoken recently about the fact that 13% of people have actually completed a single sport mode event in Gran Turismo 7. Barely 1 in 10 is not impressive. That begs the question of, well, then who are these updates for? Because if the updates are for those of us who are the broader sphere, the other roughly 90% of people who aren't interested enough, let's say, in sport mode and the esports for it to keep us around, well then, what are these cars supposed to do? They're cars which many people weren't asking for. They're cars that come in such a drip feed quality that it makes GT Sport honestly seem generous in comparison, and circuits are something which has become so much of a joke because of the vast gulfs of time in between them that it makes it pretty obvious to anyone with a functioning brain that has a couple of wrinkles in it at least that this game is not about adding content. It is about, as many of us already know, but for some who still don't seem to want to believe it, a drip feed system. Gran Turismo 6 proved it even as far back as then, having stuff like Senna's Lotus shown in trailers when it was not in the game yet, and was later added as an update. Various other occasions where we've seen stuff in photos, promos, early leaks, which is being held back for no other reason than just to seem like there's stuff going on. Which in fact it isn't, any more than the twitch in a corpse means it's still alive. On the other hand, if those updates are to keep the sport mode players happy, well, how exactly is that? How many sport mode players get a ton of use out of a GR Corolla? Some of them, sure. How many get use out of a Vision GT car? Probably a lot less. In fact, last time I checked, most of the esports seems to involve Group 4, Group 3, and occasionally a bunch of Red Bulls, and very little else. So unless they're suddenly out of nowhere planning to expand that into including all kinds of tuning and different classes and categories and point levels, again, who is it for? The 13% are mostly only racing in Group 4s, Group 3s, and Red Bulls. So the cars clearly aren't for them, and if it's not for the rest of us, logically it leaves you with what I said about the twitching corpse. Something which is designed to be able to plaster the word free on it, as if that's supposed to impress us when we've already bought a console, an internet connection, paying for electricity and buying the game that we are so privileged to be able to play, and then you slap free on it. Oh well, I tell you what, I'm so glad that this Corolla is free, because I sure as hell wouldn't have paid to download that Corolla into the game. So telling me it's free, well, that ain't saying much. A bowl of dog excrement which you scrape off of the street is also free. That doesn't mean it's a good thing to chow down on any more than a garbage update of Cars is. So get that idea of something being free equals good out of your smooth brain, if you are inclined to believe that. Who is this for? Who are these decisions for? Yet again, it brings me back to what I've said so many times. Polyphony is horrifically inept at actually communicating with their own community. And as much as so many people, both at Polyphony and otherwise, if they even know about me at all, probably hate me for the things I say about the game, regardless, I frankly couldn't care less, because contrary to what you might believe, it does actually come from a place of love. I adore Gran Turismo, and that's why it annoys me so much, because I've seen the greatness, much like people who enjoy Marvel, compared to what that looks like now, compared to various other franchises that I've crashed and burned, and cursed be anyone who enjoys NFL, I guess, these days, with that one being the ultimate example of pure liquid garbage being poured out over the public. It brings me back to what I said about why the servers were shut down. It clearly wasn't for money. Because if it was something about the cost of the servers, well then how on earth could the same people who shut down GT6's servers, despite still having fans playing it barely 5 months after GT Sport came out, how on earth could those same people ever justify keeping GT Sport's bloated corpse pulsing for 700 days after GT7 had already made it redundant? And that's not 700 days of its entire life cycle, that's 700 days just since Gran Turismo 7. Any time in that time would have been primed to shut down GT Sport, but for some grand design just too vast for our little pea-brains to understand, GT Sport lasted so much longer than it ever should have, in terms of its servers being up. And for those who are scrambling to find some morsel of reason in the dust as to why any of this makes sense, if it were for the sport mode players, well again that brings me back to Gran Turismo 7 in terms of an overall concept. The game was very clearly, and watch any trailer, literally any of the release or before release trailers for the game, and it is clearly, unarguably, marketing itself to appeal to those of us who were missing what was before sport. It very overtly played on nostalgia. Pennzoils, deep forests, trial mountains, old style vibes, a mix of 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, very deliberately put together. Some of that of course would have been for marketing, obviously, got to make that back. At the same time though, it was clearly intended to show that they had some kind of recognition that what was wanted had not been delivered. Because if it had been delivered with sport, they wouldn't have to show off that this new game was doing it. That annoys me even more, because that means they know that we wanted it, which is why they brought it back. That's an unspoken acknowledgement that many of us were not happy with the previous game, and that they were trying to make it at the very least look like the new game was going to have that. Little did we know. What GT7 has ultimately turned out to be, as enjoyable as many of its component parts are, is a husk of a Gran Turismo game. A shiny, aerodynamic, chrome, race-prepped bag of rust that is going to immediately fall apart under any kind of scrutiny when you compare it to the games that came before. And, of course, we can't ever release a video like this without the hordes of people on this website or others saying, well, see, he complains about it, but then he keeps making videos about it. He's happy to get the views and he's happy to make money about Gran Turismo 7. If you hate it so much, why are you still playing it for? You're a hypocrite. It's actually a pretty easy answer. Just because something is in a slump, or something is not what it used to be, or something isn't performing as you would hope, it doesn't mean you stop doing your job. You're still a reviewer. You still produce content for those who hopefully are enjoying the game, and for those who actually hope for, I don't know, maybe better in future again. Like a car reviewer. Oh no, I love BMW, but then they brought out this one car that I didn't like. Guess that means I'll never review another BMW again. No, dumbass, that's not how it works. So of course I'll continue talking about Gran Turismo, good or bad. On the other hand, when you look again at Gran Turismo 7's release, how it was clearly, let's be generous and say trying. Let's assume the best intentions even now, and say that they were in fact trying. So deluded by their own failed attempt at making it feel like an older game. Let's say that even they believed it, sniffing deeply on those farts. At that very same time, Kaz himself, in an interview, has confirmed that he basically had no idea that anyone even played the older games. And of course I'm paraphrasing here, but he was at some such live event, I believe it was, and he noticed some of the younger crowd, presumably some of the people who were going to compete there that day in Sport or 7, whichever it was, were playing some or other older Gran Turismo title and loving it. He couldn't seem to fathom that. In fact, from the way he described it, it doesn't even seem to have crossed his mind that people, young or old, would even want to go back and play an older game. I've said before that I understand that. Even from my perspective, just as somebody who makes videos, it is easy to forget things you used to do that many people probably still enjoy. And it's why I've constantly tried to keep that same vibe going, to the point where even now, I literally do series like special projects, which are a decade old on the channel, but now they've kept the spirit of what they were, but utilised the newer games in terms of better production quality, better graphics, and being able to make the cars look like the replicas we're trying to make, blah, blah, blah. The point is, looking to the past and appreciating it is a key to both not making the same mistakes, but it's also a key of bringing the community back to things that they actually did love, because you don't need to throw out everything the next time you make a new game. You learn nothing when you do that. It means that every game is experimental. And that is one hell of a bad business strategy. And for those who want to poo-poo the business side of what I'm saying, just take a glancing look at the sales figures for GT Sport versus GT7. GT Sport sold 8 million copies. Do you know how many GT7 sold? An estimate of 5 to 6 million. That's still a lot, but is a massive drop in comparison. So the fact that you have this weird combination of Kaz giving little to any thought about people enjoying the older games, only ever looking to the future, to the point where, and I have said this many times, and doubtless I'll say it again, you have a series which constantly feels like they're working on the next thing instead of finishing what they're actually doing right now, which I'm sure is part of the problem with any game development. You're constantly being pushed by the higher-ups, by the bottom liners, by the investors to get the next thing ready. I don't doubt that. And I know that Polyphony has had some real-world problems in terms of natural disasters, I believe it was, so I'm not saying that there is never an occasion where you can let up. But the thing is, this is way beyond that. This isn't just a recent thing. This is multiple games now. I've also said a number of times, and I will continue to do so, I don't begrudge anyone to enjoy GT5, GT Sport, GT PSP, even the GT Prologues, which I myself have very little interest in playing. And certainly not GT7, trying to find the good in it, which I certainly do. I mean, anyone who knows me on the channel and who follows my content every month knows that the entire purpose of the special projects car packs, which is hilariously continuing to bumfuddle some people who think that they're real updates, despite the entire video description telling you what it is, those are entirely around the idea of giving the players something to do. Because we're always waiting for the last minute news of what we might or might not be getting this month. I've had a number of comments from people saying that they look forward to these piddly little tune setups that I do more than the actual cars. As flattered as I am, and as glad as I am that you enjoy those, how horrific of a statement. How horrible the situation must be in Gran Turismo 7 that you look forward to me making a tune setup more than Polyphony actually putting stuff in the game. And I know that that's not the case for everyone. I'm certainly not saying that that's the case. I'm saying that as an example, a small microcosm of this vast problem. Because one thing that you'll notice, every single subset of Gran Turismo player, none of them are happy. The sport mode players, especially recently, have been saying more and more, okay, we've got some new cars, we've got maybe a new track, some new career mode events. What about these 3 or 4 massive issues that are still there in terms of penalties, in terms of glitches, in terms of sport mode events, etc., just not working as they're supposed to? These are supposed to be Kaz's golden children. So if he can't even provide what they want, who is this for? Those of us who enjoy the older experience certainly aren't happy. Those who enjoy the newer experience still have things to complain about. And of course you can always technically find things to complain about, but I think if you really think about it, you know that's not my point. These aren't little details that we're talking about. These are broad, sweeping swaths of the game that are completely, woefully mismanaged compared to who they are supposedly appealing to. If the traditional fans aren't happy and the esports fans aren't happy, at least not happy enough to even complete a single sport mode event, which sure as hell ain't a good sign, well then where's this third group? Who is this middle ground that it's supposed to be appealing to? Because it seems to me like Kaz is making himself a game that we happen to be able to play. Good for you. You're taking a steaming dump on the series that we got you to. And if that's what you want to do and drive the series into the ground, go for it. And if this isn't the case, if that is not a part of Kaz's plan at all, if these are just genuine mistakes, well then you know what? If only there were a way for the community to find out. If there were only some kind of communication method known to humanity wherein you could inform other beings of what your intentions were. If only someone could invent something like that. Maybe they could call it speaking. Maybe they could call it words. Maybe they could call it putting out a tweet every once in a while to actually give those of us who want to love this more even some idea of what in the hell is going on with this series. Because this ain't new. This has been happening for a while now. And the amount of people who are getting so over this, and the only reason why they're still around doesn't even have the justification that I do, that it's my job and that I'm doing it for the community who do and don't love it, and for those who, like me, are trying to enjoy it. Those people have no reason to come back, and some of them are dropping out completely, especially when I'm sorry to inform you, Gran Turismo, but you really can't afford to be rolling the dice like that if you actually do want to compete on the global scale. Sure, you've got your laurels, but those laurels are going to start to bend if you keep resting on them every time. Because Forza is bringing out a new game, and it's already attracting more attention. Horizon 5 is still putting out better post-release content than GT7 has ever had from day one. And other games like Project Cars and Assetto Corsa and various others, even The Crew, if you want to go down that route, these are games which are not getting smaller with each title. They are growing. And if Gran Turismo wants to keep people's attention, keep people's time, and get some little bit of cash out of people's wallets, you're going to have to do better, because it ain't going to last. And to really cap off my thoughts, this is not something which is going to seem like it's connected, but I think it actually is. So let me explain why. The thing that annoys me even more about this is when you factor in why Tourist Trophy 2 doesn't exist. I've spoken about this in another video, but it needs to be brought up again, because this is an extremely vital point, one of the biggest issues I have, and it's one of the reasons why I speak so boldly, what some would see as so out of line, I'm sure, about what Kaz's intentions seem to be. That Kaz himself, so you can't argue with this, said that Tourist Trophy 2 is not coming, yet at least, because he's not happy with how realistic the experience of playing it can be with current hardware. In particular, he seemed to be alluding to a bike equivalent of essentially using a wheel, and doubtless implementing some kind of VR in there as well to make it even more realistic. On the surface, you might even agree with that. You could even say that you understand his sentiment. Except it doesn't make any sense, because how delusional do you have to be to think that Sony are actually going to put the time into developing a motorcycle equivalent to a racing wheel, or that any company would for that matter, for the sake of one game? Could they do that? Sure, somebody could. It has been done in the past, but in a very rudimentary way compared to modern tech. But the idea that they're going to put that kind of development into just Tourist Trophy 2, even if they haven't already for the likes of Ride, which is a very, very popular motorcycle series, well, not only do you have to be pretty self-assured to think that that technology is even going to be made in the first place, certainly with no game on the horizon to even justify it, but secondly, it kind of makes me concerned that a lot of these things are not only unlikely to happen, but that Kaz has, even though he may not realise it himself, all but assured that they won't happen. Because if you are saying that you're not going to release something until the tech that it needs is released, and we already know that that tech is at best extremely unlikely to come anytime soon, if at all, because the market demand just isn't there, well then that means you've just all but confirmed it's never going to happen. And there is a certain point where you have to say, okay, this is my vision, but my vision is not attainable. It is not realistic. It's not reasonable. Sacrifices have to be made. Look at literally every single concept car of all time. There is a reason why they never look like that when they reach production, because sacrifices have to be made. Likewise, with a goal for a series, a game, a franchise, an idea, sacrifices have to be made to make it a reality. So this idea that it has to be that for it to be achieved is going to undermine Gran Turismo, because I can already tell what Kaz's future goals are going to be, and I was going to make this into a separate video, and maybe I'll cut this out and turn it into one. But I believe there are 3 things that are going to mark the future of Gran Turismo, and you can mark my words here and check this in future to see if I was correct. 3 pillars of Gran Turismo moving forward unless something radically changes. Number 1, Sophie AI will be pushed hard. 2, VR will be pushed hard. And 3, esports will not let up anytime soon. I believe that those 3 pillars are the things, the 3 top priorities of Kaz moving forward, and that he wants those 3 things to form the core of Gran Turismo's not game, but its experience. I believe that those 3 things will define Gran Turismo moving forward. Some might love that. Many will not. That is what it comes down to. Does Kaz want to keep his pure, single-minded focus to achieving, let's say I'm wrong, let's say it's not that, whatever his goal is he going to stick dead on to exactly what he wants to achieve, even if that means it will never be done? Or is he actually going to put the community first and give the community what will make them happy while pursuing the things that might make them happy in future? Because woulda, shoulda, coulda, maybe, eventually, sometime, perhaps, he is hoping, I promise. It doesn't mean jack. What means something is what is actually shown, what is actually done. We see your intentions by your actions, not by what you say. And Kaz is making it pretty clear that what he cares about is categorically, uncompromisingly, nothing to do with the community. It is what he wants out of his game. Good for you, Kaz. You can certainly afford to do that, as long as you're willing to burn what you made to the ground. Either that, or have you and 10 people playing it. Overall, though, that's it for my thoughts. I know you're going to put yours down below. Either way. So, I'll see you with more content, and there'll be more Gran Turismo 7 content. Because of course there will. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.